want to give thanks to one of our sponsors, CHTV. Look, at a time like this, I think that our immune system and keeping our immune system up right now is more important than ever. I can also tell you that I pay attention to the things that keep my immune system on par and healthy. So glad that CHTV is one of our sponsors here on Cell TV, and it's a product that I use, my family uses, and hopefully you'll check it out. And by the way, you can check it out with the link right here below. If you want to try a free bottle, you can actually get a free bottle, just pay the shipping. And I think you'll reorder after that, but check it out.
If you're listening to this podcast and want to access the amazing CHTV product Dr. Pompa just mentioned, please visit freeimmunity.com. Again, that's freeimmunity.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cellular Healing TV. I'm Ashley Smith, and today we welcome Mind Transformation and Holistic Autoimmune Specialist, Dr. Eva Detko. She is here to discuss the whys and hows of emotional detox for optimal healing, and she'll also share her top emotional detox strategies to achieve optimal wellness. This is an important topic, and I cannot wait to turn this over to both of you. So let's get started and welcome Dr. Eva Detko and Dr. Pompa to the show. This is Cellular Healing TV.
Well, welcome, Dr. Eva. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so hugely passionate about this topic, so really excited to talk about it with you.
All the way from southern Spain, nonetheless.
Yes, at the moment. Yes, there are plans to move to Poland, but yes, southern Spain at the moment, a bit nomadic.
Yeah, which is your heritage is from Poland, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So, and it's a technology, right? You're in Spain right now, and here we are. I love that. 9:30 at night where you are, and 1:30 where I am. So
I apologize in advance if I'm not completely with it, but yes, it is a bit late.
We had to get you before you went to bed. All right, but that's good. I'm glad. Thank you for making the time. This subject, I actually have been just fascinated. I always say, look, I'm not the expert when it comes to emotional detox. That's why I have you here. I'm the expert when it comes to chemical detox, and how that affects our lives. But, when we look at conditions, which this is another area of your study, it's autoimmune. This is a big topic for me because so many people have it unknowingly. But I talk about it as a three-legged stool, meaning that one leg, certain gene gets triggered of autoimmune. It's different for all of us. We, all of us have these weaknesses or susceptibilities. But the center leg is the stressors that turn on that gene. And it could be physical, chemical, or emotional. And in my doctor training the other day, we all were in agreement that we see this combination of chemical and emotional traumas that take place in a perfect storm. And boom, we have the autoimmune condition or whatever condition it is. And then the gut plays a role here as well as part of that three-legged stool. But today, emotional trauma, I think that it doesn't really get the attention that it really deserves, in that trapped emotions are no different than trapped trauma or trapped toxins, in that the body doesn't know the difference. So I want to give some solutions for people, and that's why you're here. But let's talk about the problem as it relates to conditions like autoimmune. But, how do traumas cause the same type of thing that a chemical would?
Well, first of all, I really want to say that I want to sort of draw some parallels here, because obviously you talk a lot about biochemical detox. I talk a lot about emotional detox, and it's true. It's for the body, toxins, right? Whether they are emotional or chemical. And unfortunately, what happens is, for one reason or another, there's obviously a multitude of reasons for this, but there seems to be quite a, what I find, a superficial approach to emotional detox. And I remember when you kindly gave me an interview for one of my summits, and we were talking about biochemical detox, and you were talking that, about the fact some people can approach the biochemical detox in a superficial kind of way, just taking a supplement that says, oh, this is a detox supplement, I'll just take that.
Yep.
And a few days later, I'm considering myself detox. And then, so I have to say that I find the same sort of problem with emotional detox. So this is why I really encourage people to dive a little bit deeper into the subject, because when we have a lot of emotional toxicity, and believe me, anybody with chronic physical symptoms, whether it is autoimmunity or something unidentified, which, you know, a lot of people go through, maybe they don't have a diagnosis, but they have a whole host of physical symptoms that they've had for years. If there's anything like that going on, obviously anything like cancer obviously falls into that category as well. We're really talking about you're not going to get to that point that the body manifests physically in that way without having a level of emotional toxicity. And in all honesty, I haven't seen this yet myself. Perhaps there's somebody out there who has seen this, but I have not seen a person with physical issues that wouldn't have complex emotional stuff going on, and they may or may not be aware of how much emotional complexity there is, because actually that's part of the issue. Part of the issue why people treat it so superficially is because it's not so easy to understand for people. It can be quite confusing. It can be quite overwhelming. Not people who specialize in biochemical stuff won't necessarily at the same time be experts on emotional stuff. So if you go to a functional medicine doctor, they will tell you to manage your stress, but that may mean that you will occasionally do a meditation, and that is just not going to do it, is it? It's just not going to do it, right? So I just wanted to just put it out there that we really need to, you know, when we're talking about cellular healing, when we're talking, well in functional medicine, natural medicine, we're talking about root causes when it comes to healing. So we want to really go after the root causes rather than treat symptoms, which is obviously what conventional medicine tends to do. So with emotional healing, it has to be the same. We can't just treat the symptoms. We need to go after the root causes. And so, of course, we're going to go into more detail with, you know, early childhood events, emotional trauma. But there's obviously other layers to that. But that's another thing that I want people to think about when you're thinking about your emotional healing. You need to be, rather than think, oh, how do I maybe numb the bad feeling that I have, being frustration, anger, sadness, you need to be thinking, well, why is it that I am experiencing this feeling on a regular basis? So obviously we're talking about chronic stuff. So if you occasionally get angry, by the way, this is a normal human response and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm talking about symptoms, which I will hopefully get to that in a moment. What sort of symptoms are we talking about when we're talking about emotional healing? But we're talking about stuff that goes on chronically, day in, day out. And the issue with that is that a lot of people are not even aware that that's happening. Because why is that? Because we desensitize. If we exposed to something day in, day out, and we experience something day in, day out, very often people will get to a point where they will desensitize to the fact that they may be chronically angry or chronically anxious or chronically, you know, fearful, upset, whatever it is, sad, because that's been with them for such a long time. And they will say, well, that's just how I've always been, right? So they won't even go to question why they're feeling this way in the first place. They just accept it as part of who they are, which then causes other problems because it becomes part of their identity, and that's whole other story, right?
So, I mean, it's similar to, like, gosh, I mean, I didn't realize I was angry, but they have mercury in their brain. So it's like, oh gosh, I just respond that way. With these emotional toxins, it's the same thing. So how do we identify it? Because I'll use myself as an example, right? I mean, I had dyslexia as a child and got through it. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it's part of my gifting today, right? I mean, what makes me special in the sense that I can remember things the way I do. So I wouldn't have even the influence that I have if it wasn't for my dyslexia. However, when I dug deeper here, I realized how many things that I do react certain ways because of my insecurity. It was developed thinking I was dumb because I couldn't read, because I was, all of that. I literally had to go uproot that. So I would look at it and say, well, I wasn't abused. That's a real trauma. Meaning that, like, that's real stuff. I didn't have that. So I always put myself in the camp of, well, I didn't have these emotional traumas. Well, I did. And arguably my brain, it could perceive it as traumatic as being abused, right? I mean, so the point is that how do we identify it? Like, that was me looking back and identifying something that I didn't think affected me, but did.
So yeah, you made a good point there about the sort of severity of trauma. This is very interesting because people often think of trauma, they will hear a term PTSD, and they will assume that in order to consider themselves traumatized, they would have had to go through something really major. Perhaps, be in a war zone, or somebody dying, or even a divorce or something like that, being abused.
Right.
And that obviously is an issue. If something like this has happened to somebody, then that is one of the adverse childhood events we talk about. However, people really do underestimate the sort of trauma that doesn't necessarily happen as a one-off big event, but rather is an accumulation of small, not even events, but sort of this sort of daily, perhaps daily, maybe teasing at school, something like that. So I had that. I was bullied at school for 4 years. So it wasn't necessarily that one big thing happened.
Right.
That was highly damaging. That was highly damaging because it was something that happened over a long period of time. In addition to that, and this is the biggest one that I see when I work, because I predominantly work with people with chronic health issues and highly complex emotional issues. And the one that I sort of see as most underestimated is the developmental trauma. And the developmental trauma is even more interesting because it's not about one big thing that happened, although it obviously could be, but it's really about lack of bonding. That's really what developmental trauma is about. And the first years, the 0 to 4 in particular, extremely vulnerable years for any human being. And in those years, if there isn't enough human contact, if there isn't enough basically kisses, cuddles, connection that every human being needs, then that could result in a person actually being traumatized, and that is perfectly valid. And in fact, that sort of trauma will usually affect people's identity. So it's not so much that it will just affect their behavior. No, it will cut much deeper. It will go right to the core. And why is that important? This is important because when dealing with emotional stuff, the behavior also, for instance, somebody could have a phobia. So they're doing this phobia. Phobia is really a behavior. So when they're doing this phobia, maybe that they see a spider and they freak out, and every time, they run this pattern over and over. But that is actually fairly easy to deal with. A straightforward phobia I can deal with a client in a matter of half an hour, and maybe sometimes not even that, and that phobia is gone forever. So it's actually an easy, if it's a straightforward phobia, obviously not a complex one. But then what most people actually with chronic illness will experience, they will experience erosion of their core identity. And that is actually a much, so that will take a little bit more time to resolve. It still can be resolved, but it's not a superficial issue. It's core identity issue. And that comes from a lot of the time from the fact that people may have just felt abandoned as a child, or just purely and simply their emotional needs in the first few years of their lives were not being met sufficiently.
Wow. And how would you know? Just like a toxin, like I always say, when we look at toxins, there's so many parallels here, that the number one source is actually what we inherited from our mother and father. You don't know that, right? You know, especially mom gives lead and mercury through utero. You don't remember that, of course, right? You don't remember not being cuddled or kissed, or you don't remember what happened or the stresses in that time, which can create that. You know, I just taught a mastermind to my doctor group, and I was talking about really about functioning from your true identity. And when I'm trying to help these doctors, and when I see them not functioning from a true identity, is when they don't build rapport with patients, whether they're speaking from stage or one-on-one. And it's because they're not coming across as authentic, you know, in a sense. And it's really the key is they're not functioning from their true identity. So what you're saying is, you know, when you're not in your true identity, that affects your life in many ways. Here I am training professionals, and the ones that are having trouble functioning just from who God made them, who they should be, the gifts they have, they're struggling. It could be all the way back from 2 years old.
That's absolutely right. And it's very interesting because, of course, as you said, that's going to affect so many things. It's going to affect your whole life, because ultimately erosion of your identity means you're not going to be comfortable with who you are. So it doesn't get any sort of worse than that, let's say, when it comes to emotional healing. We need to heal that. That's the foundation. That's the foundation of everything. Because if you're not comfortable with who you are, and you maybe you self-criticize, you beat yourself up over various things, you tell yourself that you're not good enough, that you're too stupid, too fat, too thin, too this, too that, right? When you do all that on the regular basis, a lot of people have this negative self-talk that just goes on every hour of every day, and they don't even know that they're doing it. So of course, rapport with other people will be difficult, because you will always project. So in psychotherapy, we call it projection, when you project your own emotional crap onto other people, basically, right? And that would, for instance, manifest, let's say somebody feels they're self-critical, they're critical of themselves, and they don't feel good enough. Immediately, what they're going to do is they're going to assume that other people are critical of them. So that's what I mean by projection, right? And so when you think about it, every single relationship that you have will be affected by that, including relationship with patients, because if you're not comfortable with who you are, undoubtedly you will impact the relationship with your patient. And of course, we know how important the relationship with the patient is for that, you know, to the healing, right?
Right. So here's the thing. It's just like toxicity. How do we identify it? And then, okay, how do we detox these emotions? So, all right. So give some solutions of how we identify areas where this may have affected our identity, and this may have caused emotional traumas, and we don't even know. So how do we know?
So actually, yes. So you asked that question, and yes, I was going to answer that. So let's start with how do we know? So I actually devised this questionnaire that I have on my website. If people want to go in a little bit deeper, I'll explain in a minute what symptoms we're looking out for. But if you want to do it at a deeper level, you can go to my website, check out that questionnaire. It's just free for people to look at.
Yeah, we'll make sure, Ashley will put that up here, that we can go to your website.
Because the reason why I say that is oftentimes people will say, no, I'm good. I really don't have anything like that going on. But when they do the questionnaire, that really opens up their eyes. And there are things that people wouldn't have thought about when it comes to emotional toxicity. But let me give you a few examples. So I already mentioned in passing negative self-talk. So if you identify that you do have negative self-talk, then that is emotionally toxic, and that definitely tells me that there would have been some issues earlier on in your life. Anything to do with, in fact, poor self-worth, poor self-esteem, poor self-image. Those are the ones that are identity based.
Give us examples of the negative self-talk and
Yeah, sure. So for instance, you're doing something and you're thinking, oh, I'm not really doing this right. I should be doing this and should be doing that, and maybe I'm not good enough to do this. I'm not smart enough to do this, and just talking yourself down. Yeah. Talking yourself down really is what I'm talking about, and saying things, looking yourself in the face, in the mirror, looking at yourself and thinking, oh gosh, I'm so ugly, and I wish I didn't have this pimple or whatever else. I mean, it's just that constant negativity directed at yourself.
Let me ask you a question. I want you to keep going, giving us examples, but I have to ask this right here. Can it go the opposite way? Meaning, narcissistic people, oftentimes out of great insecurity, they make this false thing. You look at these people and you go, my gosh, they must be super insecure because they're the greatest at everything and they're always right. I mean, so can it be the opposite to protect that person?
So a lot of people overcompensate, and you're right. You can spot that from miles away, right? You can sense when somebody is truly comfortable with who they are, and they're a confident person, they're an assertive person, which assertive is a positive thing. It's, it's good to be assertive, right? And assert yourself in life. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is that line that some people cross, it's quite true, and they go out of the way to appear confident, or they always have to prove that they're right. And so, for instance, they would, if somebody questions them, they would go and research on the internet and dig out an encyclopedia or whatever, that they will just go out of the way to prove that they're right on this particular point. Stuff like that, right? It's overcompensation.
And then they have almost an obnoxious self-positive talk, right? Where it's like you look at it and go, it's just not normative, right? And they have like that kind of talk too. So.
Yeah, and so part of it is actually personality trait. Part of it is personality trait. There is I use different personality profiling tools, but one of them is Enneagram, which people may be familiar with, right? And there's 9 personality types. But what's interesting is it's not necessarily that that you sort of one thing or the other. It's just that you just sort of dominate in one area with your personality, and we all do. But what's also interesting is that across each type, it's a spectrum. So you can be at a high expression of that personality type or at a really low expression of that personality type. So that narcissistic type person would be actually the lowest expression of type A, for instance, yes. However, you see, if that person ever comes out of the narcissistic bubble, which obviously with narcissists, that's the whole thing, they just don't see the wood for the trees, right? But occasionally that may happen, that people decide to embark on self-development or whatever else they're going to do. And they may actually recognize that even though their safety is in always being right and always being, sort of superior or whatever else that they need to do to feel important, when they step out of it and they understand that they can actually be more balanced and still feel good about the world and about themselves. But that's a journey that is very, very difficult for somebody who is naturally skewing in that direction. So yes, a part of it is actually a personality thing. But most people, so yes, we have a lot of narcissists out there, that's true. But most people, and particularly people who have chronic health issues, they will be on the other side of this. So they will be more inclined to do the negative self-talk.
So the self-talk, negative self-talk is one symptom. What's another sign?
So another side is anything such as not feeling deserving. So something happens and you feel, oh yeah, this is nice, but I just don't feel like I truly deserve it. So just feeling like you're worth less, and everybody else around you is somehow more worthy than you are. So that's a big identity issue as well. Chronic guilt and shame, this is quite a big one because that will come out from early childhood as well. And I'm not talking about healthy shame because there is such a thing, but most people these days, because the society shames us in so many different ways. I mean, it's nuts, right? It's nuts from the word go, particularly in the West. I'm talking Western society, obviously. Children are shamed for all sorts of things, and particularly when they're shamed around the sort of toddler age, preschool age, that could cause big problems later on. So that is something to be aware of. Just sort of going in and thinking, well, do I feel guilty all the time? Do I feel, ashamed and all the time? So it's something that people may actually be aware of, right? Mm-hmm. Another thing is feeling constantly anxious and constantly worried or fearful. And of course, anxiety is just a symptom. It's not actually the root cause, because anxiety is basically fear. It's fear of something. Mm-hmm. But how interesting, do you not find it interesting that not so long ago we didn't even have the label that is the generalized anxiety disorder? Now we have this thing that is generalized anxiety disorder, which means that this would be somebody who is just anxious all the time about everything, and sometimes they don't even know what they're anxious about. Now that is highly emotionally toxic, right? Because you're winding up, you're basically stressing your nervous system constantly. So you're constant fight or flight. And of course you can't heal and you can't detoxify if you're constantly in fight or flight, as we know, right? So, and those fears could be of all sorts of things. Could be fear of failure. A lot of people have that. Fear of failure, fear of losing control, which are connected. Fear of criticism, fear of rejection, right? That's a big one. And of course, even things like fear of death or fear of illness. Let's not forget that illness itself is a trauma. So when somebody is being chronically ill for a very long time, oftentimes before I even get to any other trauma with them, I need to work with them on the trauma of the illness itself. And some people actually do have fear of the unknown, which links back to fear of not being in control, right? So there are also other things. People who overanalyze or overthink a lot. Because what that means that they live in their heads so much that they almost lost the connection to their feelings and to the body. And why is that? Why does that happen? Usually this happens as a result of a bad experience. And this is a protective mechanism. And some people think that if they're able to rationalize and analyze the hell out of everything, they feel safer if they can do that. But of course, it's not exactly possible to do that all the time. Sometimes we need to accept that there are things that we don't have control over, and there are things that we cannot analyze or understand. And that would make somebody that way inclined very, very uneasy, right? Just when people have this, often people say, oh, I've got a monkey mind, I can't meditate because my mind is so busy, right? Then we know there's something majorly toxic going on at the emotional level if you can't make your mind go quiet and that you've got this constant thoughts, and they're usually negative, coming into your mind just constantly. So the monkey mind obviously as well. Dwelling on anything that happened in the past. How many people do you know who can literally, who will still go over today something that happened 10 years ago 20 years ago, right? And they just can't let it go. Is that inability to let go of stuff, inability to sort of forgive, that resentment, that chronic resentment that some people hold, the chronic grudges. That's obviously highly toxic, and that definitely points to the fact that there's been that something went on earlier in life. Some level of trauma must have occurred in order for you to have that chronic resentment. And of course, when people are in toxic relationships is another one, because you need to have serious identity issues, i.e. you yourself have to feel quite unworthy in order to let other people take advantage of you and treat you like dirt. If you're in a personal or otherwise a relationship where people walk all over you and treat you like a doormat, then you know that there is an issue there, right? Yeah. So that's obviously, there's quite a lot within that, but nonetheless, really important for people to pay attention to all those things.
Yeah, no, I mean, you give us literally 9 things there that people need to look at. I mean, it's not like you'll have all of them. So how many of those would you say, okay, you need to really look deeper, that you have some emotional toxicity from your childhood?
So actually, I'm going back to the questionnaire, because I sort of graded it, and there's 42 questions on that questionnaire. So I've given you 9, right? But there is, obviously, when you break it down, there is more. Yeah. So if you answer to any more than 5, then you already have a level of emotional toxicity that needs to be looked at.
That's
right?
what I'm asking. Yeah. So take the quiz. We'll put the how to access the quiz right here.
I believe that will be really helpful to really shed some more light for people on this and where they're at, because essentially, before we can move forward and look for solutions, we sort of need to assess where we are, right? We do that with biochemistry as well.
Right. I mean, this is, again, the parallels with chemical toxicity. We want to know what we're up against, right? It's like, okay, great. Now we've identified that mold and mercury are, prevailing here. So now we know what we can do about it. Okay. So we've taken the test. Thank you for that. And then, okay, great. Now what can we do about it? Now what do we do? Right? This is the detox question. How do I detox these emotions out of me that I could live a happy, normal life? And also, again, we're talking about turn off this illness that I'm dealing with, because we know, just like the chemical toxins, it can keep these symptoms there, no difference. So I need this next level of detox so I can get where I want to go with my health or my emotions, whatever it is.
Yeah, that certainly was the case for me. When I had chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, and I was really, really sick, and I couldn't get out of bed at some point. And it was not so much the diet, because I had already been gluten-free at that point anyway, and I was quite careful about what I was eating. But it was actually doing the trauma work that got me out of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. So I definitely see that with many of my clients, because what ends up happening is I get a lot of inquiries from people who have already done a lot of work on the biochemistry front, because that's what people tend to go to first, because it's just easier. And then the emotional stuff is left till the end usually. So what I'll say here is, like, don't leave it till the end. Just do this work alongside each other, because I agree.
So what's the work? How do we do it? What's going on?
So we've got the awareness bit, and that is really, really important, because you can't, deal with something you don't know what you're dealing with.
Right.
The trauma work, there are a number of superb modalities these days, and the go-to modalities for me are havening techniques and brainworking recursive therapy. So havening techniques is actually a psychosensory modality, which means that you stimulate the receptors on the skin, and that acts directly via the nervous system connection on the amygdala part of the brain, so the part of the brain that is responsible for processing emotions. And this is a really incredible method, because you can use it for severe trauma, but you can also use it as a management tool. So for instance, you go into a meeting and you have to, give a speech or whatever you have to speak, or give a presentation, and you're a bit anxious. You can actually use it to manage the symptoms of anxiety. But of course, I always encourage to get to the root of the anxiety, and you can use that method for that.
How do you spell it? You said havening techniques?
Havening, like haven as in haven, the safe place, havening. And the havening touch itself is actually very, very simple, but please do not underestimate that just because this is simple and easy to do, a child can do this, doesn't mean it's less effective for it, because it's actually incredibly effective. it also combines really well with all sorts of other modalities. So it's a very flexible method. And people may be familiar with emotional freedom techniques. I've got havening, so I don't work with EFT so much because I've got havening. But of course, EFT is also an excellent technique to work with.
Yeah, just so people know, EFT is the tapping.
Yes, that's the tapping.
Could you show us what the havening technique is?
Right, so yes, since we've got the video here, so there are 3 sites, and essentially what's really interesting about havening techniques is that by stimulating the receptors on the skin, like I said, you're actually able to change your brainwave activity. So usually when we're stressed or when we're going through a traumatic experience, the brainwave activity is really high. With havening, we're able to bring it right down all the way to delta level, which is the same level of activity that we experience in deep sleep, which of course is when we heal. And so havening is very conducive to healing in that respect, right? So there are 3 sites, and it's really, really simple. So the first one is the face, and all we're doing essentially is strokes like this, right? And you can go from the top of the forehead, or you can go even from under the eyes, right? So that's the first one. The second one is the arms, and you can do it for 1 layer of clothing. Of course, if you have lots of layers, you need to remove some of them, but you don't need to do it on the skin. You can do it for 1 layer of clothing. So like I've got now and you've got now. So we're going from the top of the shoulder and we sweeping all the way down to the elbow. Obviously, I'm just doing this now. You don't need to hold your arms up in the air. I'm just wanting to show this, right? So you're obviously keeping them down here so that you're comfortable, and that's more or less the speed and the tempo of it. So it doesn't need to be too slow or too fast. It's just sort of moderate. And then the third one is your hands, and it goes like this. So it's basically almost like washing your hands. Very easy, right? So here's the thing with this modality. So if you can actually work on a specific traumatic memory with this. If you have a memory of something that you experienced that's still causing an emotional response, so that's the key one. You still need to have an emotional response. And if you, so you go to that memory, you could, close your eyes, go there. And then the moment you bring that feeling up, because of course you remember something and immediately you've got that emotional response, you start havening at that point, straight away. And we don't want to re-traumatize, so we don't want to necessarily go over and over what we experience. So what we do with havening is we start stimulating the brain in a variety of different ways. So we use humming, we use counting, and we use sort of spatial awareness. So for instance, you would imagine that you're walking on the beach or in the forest or something like that. You imagine yourself walking or skipping on a skipping rope or something like that. So there's movement involved. And then finally, we also use the eye movement. People may have heard of EMDR. Yeah. Right. So this utilizes the eye movement also, as well as the havening touch. You're doing that, and at the same time, you're moving your eyes sharply right and sharply left. So you sort of can go over your own. If you obviously, I wanted to just caveat here. If you have complex emotional trauma, don't try and work on this yourself, because you could bite off more than you can chew, obviously. But if you maybe had a family gathering and somebody really got on your nerves, and then you're still fuming a week later, go back to that in your mind, bring up the emotional response and haven on that. And in a matter of 10 minutes, sometimes even less, you could get rid of that emotional response. So what then happens is you still have the memory, but it does not upset you anymore, because essentially is the emotional response that's going to put the stress on the nervous system. If we just have a memory of something and it causes no emotional response whatsoever, then fine, that's not toxic. what's toxic is the negative emotional response that that memory will induce. And that can be addressed with havening. And of course, if people know tapping, then of course they can tap on those things as well, on those negative memories. So that is one way of using this modality. I mix it with all sorts of things, and like I said, I work with really complex emotional trauma. So I bring all sorts of other things into it. I bring in NLP, hypnosis, Gestalt therapy, all sorts of other things, inner child work, because of course, when you were, if you had issues in those first formative years of your life, then we need to do some work around that. So I obviously use havening alongside other techniques to do that. But you definitely, this is a self-help tool that anybody can use. And it's really amazing, because sometimes, okay, so maybe you're in the meeting and you're a bit stressed. Okay, fine, you're not going to start stroking your face, but you can still rub your hands and nobody is going to know any better, because people just do that, don't they? Nobody's going to question why you're rubbing your hands. So you can even do it in the heat of the moment where you're going through something stressful. So that's really, really excellent. And then another one that I use is Brainworking. Recursive therapy is actually a psychotherapy technique. So there's no sensory stimulation. It's actually a set protocol of steps. And just to sort of describe what we're trying to do is we're trying to interrupt the pattern. So for instance, people know that, may know or may not know, I don't know, but our conscious response is much slower than our instinctive subconscious response, right? So for instance, if I was to throw something at you, you immediately would either try to catch it or you try to get out of the way, right? And it would be something that you would just do, and then a moment later you would be aware that you've done it, right? So it's that kind of the consciousness only catches up a couple of seconds later. So with
what's this called? What's this technique called?
Brainworking recursive therapy, or Bwrt for short.
Okay.
Right? So the idea here is that we want to almost interrupt the pattern, because when people have emotional responses, it's usually that they have a memory and then that emotional response comes in. So we want to sort of interrupt, we actually almost injecting something else in between the original memory and the response. So we actually work with preferred response, and we working with future memory. So we kind of replacing the original memory, if you will. That's sort of what we're trying to do with this one. And your mind doesn't actually know reality from fiction, so the alternative memory work is actually really, really effective. And that's another great technique that people can do if they have memories that are seriously disturbing to them. They can go.
Give us an example of how you would interrupt that. I mean, what would?
So the protocol has got about 14 steps in it, and you follow those exactly. But basically, what you do is you recall the original memory, and with that, usually there will be an emotional response. But even if there isn't that immediate emotional response, we can still work with the memory. And then we want to then think about how we want it to be instead in that moment. So we know what we did or didn't do, but how could you sort of change that original memory to be more positive, more empowering, so you're more in control? And we want to keep it positive, so we don't want to be vindictive in it or anything like that. Just keep it nice and clean, keep it positive, right? And then you also create a future memory where in that memory you look back and you realize, hey, I had this problem once, but now I can see I don't have this problem anymore. So that the future movie of whatever it is that you're doing is telling you that you don't have that problem anymore. Mm-hmm. And then what we're doing is, and there's other steps involved, but basically you jumping around between those three stages, between those three memories, the original and the preferred and the future memory. And what then ends up happening is that after a while, so you repeat that X number of times, and then there's other steps involved, but after a while, what often happens is that you can no longer recall the original memory in the same way as you did initially, number one. And number two, you don't have the emotional response that comes with it. So again, you can eliminate that emotional toxic response, essentially. So that's a great one. This one is not so easy to do on yourself, but the alternative memory work, this is not necessarily something completely new, because in NLP we use the alternative memory work as well, and that people can do on themselves. So that is as simple as going over the traumatic memory or whatever memory that upsets you still, and gives you that feeling of fear, anger, frustration, whatever, or sadness, and then you go over that memory in a different way. So you create a different movie of that memory, as if you're still there doing something different in order for that memory to give you a better, so you have a better outcome in the memory, in other words. Yeah, so you change the outcome. And so that's another sort of so that's more of a psychotherapy technique. But another one that I really, really want people to have a go at is the inner child work, because that's huge. Because as I described, we have those different stages of child development. We've got infancy, we've got toddler, preschool. John Bradshaw was the one who described this really well. If somebody wants to know a little bit more about this, John Bradshaw's Homecoming is a great book to read. And he so he talked about infancy, toddler, and preschool and school child. And we have different emotional needs through those different stages, because as we develop, our needs change. So in the infancy stage, of course, it's all about touch, it's about that kind of comfort, physical comfort. But then as we become a little bit older, we start learning to say no. And then we start to communicate, and so on and so on. So our needs change through those different stages. And sometimes when people, for example, have difficulty saying no, I already know that there was something that happened at the toddler stage, because they never developed this ability to say no and feel good about saying no. Wow. And that's another symptom, when people just say yes to everything and then they feel resentful about it, but they're just not able to say no to people. So that's already a little, red light there. Another one is, for instance, when people have difficulties expressing anger, that will be more to do with the preschool stage. So what we can also do is we can go, if people don't have specific memories on when they were really little, it doesn't stop them from imagining. So we're creating some imagery around this time of our lives, even if it's not real, doesn't matter, because I already told you, your subconscious mind doesn't really tell the difference between what's real and what's not real, which is why you can alter memories and get a better response. So we can create that imagery around the child, and then we can bring our adult self into that memory, and we can be the protector for that child. And this may sound like something really weird, but people have incredible emotional releases and responses when they do this exercise. Again, if you know that you had loads of trauma as a child, then maybe you do need to be guided through this process, right? If you feel that, your childhood was okay, but maybe there was some wounds there that you want to heal, okay. But if you know that you had a lot of trauma, then potentially that exercise can bring up a lot of stuff that you may feel completely overwhelmed by. So if you're in that camp, then it's better to just get 2-3 sessions with somebody to guide you through this process, and then you're done, right? But I just want to be sort of do this responsibly, so that I don't want people to end up in a situation where they're not able to handle their own work, because people can do their own work. And that's how I work with people. I coach and teach people to do a lot of their own work. But there is sometimes that, when there's a lot of complexity, really pays off to have a little bit of guidance at the beginning, and then you take it away and you can do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, and I agree. Some people are going to need a coach. I mean, that's what they hire me for, right? It's like, you're too toxic. You can't do this alone. Although I encourage people, I teach people all the time. This is what you should be doing in your life. However, many people are far too toxic physically, chemically to do it on their own, and they need a coach. That's what I do, right? But same with this. You made great suggestions here, but many people watching and listening, you need a coach because you could end up in great doo-doo, just like chemical toxicity. So hire a coach. That's the point. You have her information here and the quiz even to take as a starting point, and even some things you can start right away. But I'm sure it's much deeper than that, Dr. Eva. It's, some people need you, no doubt. I so appreciate this because you gave us really good tools, right? I mean, from an understanding of testing, is this me, to like start here right away to start some of this emotional detox work. I think it was the most useful show that we've had on this subject. You gave us great tools. Like I said, tools, but yet it's still a starting place. But we have to identify this stuff just like a toxin. Otherwise, you're not going to get well. It's the hidden toxin of all hidden toxins, frankly.
Yeah. And there's one thing that I didn't mention, but there's definitely a place here to mention values and beliefs, because sometimes people can have very sort of negative response to life, not necessarily as a result of trauma, but as a result of something that I call social engineering. And this basically happens to all of us from the word go. We come into this word and immediately we're being passed on other people's values and beliefs, because quite honestly, without them, we would not be able to survive, because you need to know that you don't stick your hand in the fire, because this is a bad thing to do. So there's obviously a lot of positive beliefs that our caregivers, our parents, our guardians give us when we, at that sort of young age, when we need to learn. But at the same time, they have their own hang-ups and they have their own insecurities, right. And they're going to end up, a lot of it, and will end up being your stuff just because it was their stuff. So that is another thing to pay attention to, because one of the things that people, that I didn't mention earlier as a symptom of emotional toxicity, is emotional conflict. This is huge, right? So how do you know you have emotional conflict? Because you've got that constant going on in your mind, right? So it's like, oh, I want to go in this direction, but no, oh God, and then questioning yourself and going back and forth. And you're feeling conflicted because maybe you think that your biggest value in life is making a lot of money, but at the same time, you've got your family and you want to spend time with them. And do you see what I mean? And maybe that value isn't even your value. Yeah. Maybe that's something that somebody said to you when you were young, and they said, oh, in order for your life to be worthwhile, you need to be making lots of money. Yeah, do you know what I mean? You just take it on.
One of the things that I had said when I, was coaching my docs in this is, look, you have to go back on a timeline. Of course, look at these potential, traumas that occurred, things that really changed your views, and also evaluate not just the events in our life, but the people, teachers, friends, impact that gave you certain premises, right? We carry these false beliefs and premises that set up certain values that aren't right. And yet it defines our life possibly for the negative. So you have to look at these premises and evaluate them, because you're right. Sometimes they're given to us and it's not even who we are, and we're living our life in conflict.
Yeah, and it goes back to having enough self-awareness to step back and go, okay, what is it that is going round and round in my head? Is it that maybe I actually had a client once who believed they were going to die at the age of 60 because their aunt and their mother died at the age of 60. Yeah. Now, wow, if you have a belief like that, that's really bad, right? You need to change that.
Look at the areas in your life that you're not successful or you're struggling, whether it's your health, finances, relationships, and evaluate your premises around those. Because if you have trouble with money, I promise you there's a belief that was maybe given to you from your family, your father, a teacher, brother, who knows. It's like it's not right. And then it's creating a lot of grief in your life. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. But it's somebody, people can do that for themselves. They can just sit down and actually just spend 15 minutes, half an hour to really think, what is really important to me? And what do I believe about health? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about my professional life, or whatever else it may be? And the things that are important, and just see whether those things align. Because if you're not aligned, then you're going to be emotionally toxic, and we're back to square one, having this problem all over again, right? So that's another important thing that I forgot to mention earlier.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. Thank you so much. Gosh, wealth of knowledge on this subject. I can't wait to visit your site. I'm going to take the quiz. So that's awesome.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I am really pleased that you're shining the light on this for people as well, because there needs to be more discussion on this, and there needs to be more depth. This is not just about doing an occasional guided meditation. There's a lot more to it than that.
This is important. I think I'm going to have you come to one of my seminars when we get you to the U.S. Let's get you here. Thank you, Dr. Eva. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dan. Thank you.
Hey, I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Cyto Detox. Look, podcasts cost money. There's a lot of production going around this, but we are grateful to have Cyto Detox as one of the sponsors. It's so easy for me to talk about the product because myself and my family use it constantly as we practice what I preach. For over 15 years, I've talked about and taught doctors and the public about cellular detox. And I'll tell you, Cyto was a breakthrough. Cyto was a breakthrough for us. And it's changed so many lives. So we're grateful that they sponsor Cellular Healing TV. It makes sense, doesn't it? They should.
If you're listening to this podcast and want to access the amazing Cyto Detox product Dr. Pompa just mentioned, please visit detoxoffer.com. Again, that's detoxoffer.com. Well, that's it for this week. The materials and content within this podcast are intended as general information only and are not to be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you would like to purchase some of the supplements mentioned on this show, please visit the site as seen on CHTV.com and use the code CHTV15 for 15% off. Again, that's as seen on CHTV.com. Use the code CHTV15 for 15% off. And as always, thanks for listening.